really kind of frustrated. Got this map of the whole yard here, and I can't find my grandma Kale. I found her before by accident, but I have to be honest with you, I'm really kind of frustrated. It kind of hurts my heart I can't find her. She was, I felt like she was the first person that ever, like, that I felt safe with and peace with, and like, I mean, other than my parents, of course. I always felt like she was on my side, you know what I mean? And sometimes she probably was too much. I thought she was my grandma. It turns out she was my great grandma, and turns out she wasn't even blood related. And there's a whole long story to that. I'll share it with you. I think the first thing you'll notice about Tulia, Texas is what everybody notices about West Texas is the wind. It's just ridiculous. It's blowing like, I don't know how. It's just, there's nothing to stop the wind, and it just takes its toll on you. I think it just wears you out. And my father grew up here and worked, his grandfather worked all the water rigs here in Swisher County, and my father before school would have to come and you know, go and work on the water rigs, and because the wind was so strong and it was so cold out, they would actually he'd have to climb them and bust off the ice and stuff like that off the windmills. And he just always talked about how cold the wetness and the wind would be here in Tulia, Texas, in Swisher County. Yikes. So behind me you see one of the first places I wanted you to see, which was Grandma Pepper's house, or at least that's what it was known to me. Turned out she wasn't my grandma, but I thought she was my grandma, so I'd walk down here to Grandma Pepper's house and play with the chickens, and she used to keep everything in jars, like pickled pig's feet and spiders and all kinds of weird stuff. For as a little boy, it was fascinating to me, but thinking back, there used to be a big, huge billboard sign right here, and it blocked her house, but everybody could see it from the highway right here. This was the entrance that goes to Plainview. That's how you always, as a landmark, that you always knew you're in Tulia. And when you came around this corner, it'd be a big giant billboard sign, like 4-post billboard sign, and that's how I knew that's where Grandma Pepper's house was. That wasn't my grandma. This video is going to be very different for me. This is my hometown, Tulia, Texas, but the story's not really about me. It's a story long before my arrival. It's a story mostly of my dad. My father was born here in Tulia, Texas, and although he knew his mother, he was raised by his grandparents. However, they weren't really his grandparents. Turns out my grandmother was adopted, and as the story unfolded, it began to be even more convoluted and complicated. This whole video will be dedicated to unraveling the mystery and helping to understand where my father really came from and his family and what happened to them and how he ended up in Tulia, Texas. My mother and father met right there in the drugstore that was owned by my grandpa Thurman. Right here was the drugstore when I was a kid, and I would come down here on my own, and they had one of them old school fountain areas in the back, so it smelled like a you know, like a place that you buy, you know, your drugs. That sounds bad. That's what it smelled like. But in the back, it had old school soda fountains, and I would have a cherry lime soda and lemon drops. and sit on the bench, and the ladies there had the bouffant hair and all that. They knew me by my name and they loved on me. It was really a fun time for me as a young boy growing up here. I was really young. This is the famous, what they call, you'll hear mom and dad talk about all the time, Dip Street, right here. So they would cruise this, and back in the day, you gotta understand, in the 60s, Tulia, Texas was very, very wealthy. And all the kids all the kids in town had really fancy automobiles. Have you ever seen the movie Graffiti? That's what they tell me that this town was like. And they would cruise around this mall, they cruised down Dip Street that way. Swisher Memorial Hospital. This is where I was born 50 years ago. 50 years and 2 months. The man and woman that raised my father were actually the adoptive parents of my Grandma Sue. It was always believed that they adopted my Grandma Sue from a couple named the Renfros up in Missouri, and that they had died in a train accident. Turns out that wasn't true at all. They were actually from Picher, Oklahoma, and you will see later on in this video how all those pieces came together. This is where Grandma Kale ended up living, and I was grateful to be able to have lived here with her, if not for just a few months. She was one of my favorite people, and she'd be sitting at the dining room table right here smoking, and she'd have this little radio, and she'd say, "Hey Johnny, call up the radio and let's request some, I think Conway Twitty and just old country songs that she loved to hear." And then, you'd hear the guy on the radio say, "This is a request from Emma Kale." Got pictures of me with my dad on a motorcycle right here. I got me pictures when I was a little boy playing in the dirt with my cowboy hat on and boots and diapers, and I'm playing got this little motorcycle thing playing in the dirt right here. I used to have to take the trash out for Grandma, and they had these little tin cans. I'd take it out back there, and then she'd give me a dime, and I'd walk that alley up to the Piggly Wiggly up there and buy me a little Lifesaver sucker. This is the house right here that Raymond used to live in, and I had real fond memories of Raymond. We had a lot of fun here, but I also remember his mama used to make the best tortilla shells, like handmade, homemade tortilla shells, and I'd go over there and just eat all that they could make. I loved it. But I was there at that church with my family, my dad, my sisters, and I. We did a concert there because that's the church that my dad went to. That's the church that my grandmas went to. Alright, so I gotta show you this. This is First Baptist Church, Tulia, Texas. This is where my mother got born again. This is where my mother first encountered a real God that could really, truly impact her life. Her testimony is outrageous. So how did they, is there any history at all as to, or any knowledge at all as to how this family, the Renfros, found out that there was work? They're from Neosho, Missouri, and then somehow they come over to Picher, Oklahoma. How did that kind of transpire?
He was in the military and he was an engineer.
So he really wasn't a minor, and neither was she.
Right.
No.
They just worked for the company.
Yep.
He was an engineer, and she probably was in administration.
No, I don't think she was. I think she was a housewife.
Oh, really?
No.
You start to see the mounds right over here on the left. There's the Picher water tower.
Wow.
Here's some of it.
Yeah.
So kind of give me just the backdrop of what Picher, Oklahoma is.
Picher, Oklahoma is, well, it's a town that is non-existent now, pretty much, and was at one time a major town full of people doing mining, and
Probably the
was a wealthy area. Yeah, it was
about 30,000 people.
Yeah, and you think about it in that time, 30,000 people, that was a lot of people that lived here. And here in the surrounding area. So now when you're coming into Picher, everything looks dead. In other words, you just left farmland, right? And now everything, there's remnants of an old building of some type. And all these places, these pads out here were building businesses, homes. You can see all the pads back in here.
Wow.
See all that?
And the last thing that happened was a tornado came through and wiped out the town for good.
Now we're...
So what exactly happened here? The reason this is all...
Well, what they didn't understand back in those days, there's the Indian village.
Wow.
Is they didn't understand was that I'm gonna drive kind of through
Yep.
and back. Is that lead? The human body can't be exposed to lead,
Wow.
and so all the people here that were raised here and that then lived and worked here, their IQs were found to be abnormally low as a result of the lead, and that's when all of that's when it was discovered, and that was the beginning of the end of Picher and the mines here.
Wow.
And this mine in World War I and World War II supplied lead and zinc for the war effort. See, all this was businesses here.
Yeah.
See the guard post and all these concrete pads out here.
Mm-hmm.
This was all businesses. As I said the other day, the last business here that closed was a pharmacy.
start doing with these kids?
Well, a lot of them left when they discovered the problem. The families moved
Yeah.
and left. Those that remained, they bused them from Picher to Miami
Wow.
to go to school.
Tell me about the letter.
She was dying, and she found out that they had to put the babies, which was Grandma Sue and
Dad's
Aunt
mother.
Betty, yeah,
Into
had
adoption.
into a home. And so she was writing home and telling her, you know, I know that it hurt you to have to not be able to take care of them anymore, and that I know they're probably, you know, just might cry a little bit, but they're young, they'll get over it.
Yeah.
And
And then maybe someday they could come back.
yes, maybe I can get better. And when
yeah.
I get better, then we can go and get them.
And then what happened then?
And take back. And she died the next day.
So Grandma and Granddad Kale found out through the pastor. That's correct, that
Okay.
part. But then Grandma and Granddad came to Neosho.
Oh, they did.
And adopted
got
the
'em.
babies.
Because Grandma went and saw Mother. She was in a pen like this, in a fenced-in pen. And Grandma, I don't know what happened to it. Grandma had the dress. I always had the dress Mother was wearing that
Wow.
day. And Mother came up to the fence.
And your grandma knew that was the one that she wanted to adopt.
Wow. And then
So Granddad and Grandma Kale took them to Tulia
Tulia,
Took 'em
Texas,
both, yeah.
and began the adoption process.
which is where you were raised, which
Which
is
is-
where you met Mother,
Right.
and which is where I was born.
That's right.
Right.
And if had not been for what happened here in Picher, Oklahoma, and the death of your actual grandmother,
Right.
And grandfather.
then you would have been born in this area, and who knows the ramifications of that.
Right.
I mean, there's a whole lot of ifs and whats and whatevers, but it's just a fascinating story that really good came out of a bad situation.
Correct.
And here's the kicker. We didn't know any of this story until you did a DNA test on because you started to fill out, what was the name of the program?
The Ancestry.com?
Ancestry.com. You started to fill that out, and for we got together and got you both DNA tests.
Yes.
And it was you discovering through that DNA test, and all of this information came to light. And we always thought that the Renfros were killed in a train accident, but it turns out they died here in Picher, Oklahoma from tuberculosis.
Then they both died of TB here. So all three of them, first husband and my grandmother's second husband, my grandfather and my grandmother all died here of
In
TB.
Picher, Oklahoma. And can we just take a minute and just think about the unsung hero in this whole thing? Grandma Kale and Grandpa Kale
Uh-huh.
that would care enough to come up and rescue these two little girls and give them a better life. You know, adoption is sometimes gets a bad rap, but in this case, adoption made all the difference.
Yes.
And the hearts of these two people that came and opened up their lives. And really, your grandpa, Kale, ended up kind of being like a father figure to you and raising you.
Yes.
So this is a man that didn't even know your mother, wasn't the actual birth father, and yet became the true father of the home, even to you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
fascinating.
Yep. That's a whole nother story.
Yeah.
But it's like
It was his father, and his
Yeah.
grandma was his mother, because
yeah.
his mother remarried somebody else, and so John Ed was raised by his grandpa and his grandma.
Right. Which is fascinating because I always thought it was my grandma Kale, because I thought that was his mother. And it would never really dawned on me that I had another grandma, Sue. So, that's funny.
Well, and mother was like a sister to me.
Yeah.
Growing up, more like. I mean, I knew she's my mother.
Right.
And
Right.
I loved her, but it wasn't that
Mother
bonded
son. Yeah.
relationship. It was later in life, but
Yeah.
it wasn't then.
That's cool.
Yeah.
So behind me is this little church, and for some reason it's kind of like the picture of what happened here in Picher, Oklahoma. Shows us a real community, real people living their daily lives. And in essence, this is America's Chernobyl that happened here. The greatest environmental catastrophe that probably has happened on the grounds of the United States. I can just picture people coming to church here and living their lives, going to school, and all of a sudden they find out that all these mounds around them are literally killing them.